Hello and welcome to Read Becca. Let's catch up on how my week went. So let's start, I guess, reading-wise. It was a really good reading week yet again. I'm starting to pare down my library books slowly but surely. If you saw my last video on my project for reading Christmas in July, I am trying to do a kind of a reset. So I'm reading some really fast romances that should give me a mental break while I work away at my library books, the last few that I've got. And I'm going to transition more toward picking up maybe one thing a week, one or two small things, rather than loading up constantly on, 5-6 things at a time and being backlogged, and get back into reading my own stuff for August. So all of my August TBR is going to be owned books. So that will be coming this coming week, I think. And then I was cat sitting last week, and I, of course, had to stop at Half Price Books because it is on the way to the place that I was cat sitting. So I do have a book haul coming up as well. So those should be coming up pretty soon. And then as well, coming up, I also, after that book haul, I want to do a shelf tour. So we'll get through kind of all of the shelves that I have after I get those shelved, and then I'm gonna have probably a really big haul in August because the charity sale that I love going to, huge gym sale, is gonna be coming up in mid-August. So I want to get that bookshelf tour done with all the books I have currently before I do that massive haul. So onward to what I read this week. It was a really good reading week. I enjoyed, I think, everything that I read. So I had Pew by Catherine Lacey, and this was a very short little book. I really enjoyed this. It tackles topics of identity and people's need to label you as an individual. And the plot of this follows a character that just gets called Pew because on Sunday morning, when the churchgoers arrive at church, they find an individual asleep on a pew, and that person is selectively mute, and so they can't ask any questions really, but that doesn't stop them from doing so. They agree to take in Pew and say that they're going to take care of Pew unconditionally and will meet all of their needs. But really, there are a lot of conditions. They kind of end up passing around Pew, and everybody tries to get information out of Pew because Pew does not have a clearly defined gender, sex, ethnicity, or origin. And so everybody kind of sees Pew a little bit differently and puts Pew into their own box, essentially. And so that also means that they often put their own biases on Pew, and they start opening up to Pew as well. Because Pew doesn't talk, they find themselves talking a little bit too much. And so Pew kind of becomes almost a bit of a confessional for them as they're getting passed around through the community. But as well, we also start to see that maybe this church is not quite what we think it is. Maybe it's a little bit more ominous as they're working toward this festival that they have yearly. Things about the festival don't sound quite right. So coming off of the book by Olga Tokarczuk, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, it was another really heavy-handed one for me, so I didn't like that. Seems pretty just anti-religion. And the only thing I can see that a belief in divinity makes possible in this world is a right toward cruelty. The belief in an afterlife being the real life, not here. People need a sense of righteousness to take things from others, to carry out violence. Divinity gives them that. It creates the reins for cruelty. And that's in a character perspective, so it certainly could be the character, but overall across the entire book, it kind of has that tone to me. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. I love the exploration of identity and others' perceptions of our identity, but it had some things that I didn't like as well. So that's probably a 4-star for me. Then I have Before She Sleeps by Bina Shah, and this one is a dystopian sci-fi by a Pakistani journalist, and in the notes at the end, I found it really interesting that she drew this from research on gender selection in current societies. I found that very interesting, and this is set in a world where there have been a number of catastrophes. So there was a nuclear war that drove people underground and destroyed a lot of the livable land. And then after that, people began coming out and redeveloping small areas. So this takes place in Green City, which is a South Asian city in one of those areas along the coast. And on top of that, after they reemerged, there was a virus that specifically targeted women. And so we're in a reproductive dystopia where women have to marry multiple husbands, and there is a government group that is assuring that they remain fertile, and they're taking fertility drugs to keep them pumping out babies, basically. So the women that we follow in this are part of a kind of separate group that is outside and illegal, and they live in hiding, who are acting as kind of companions and courtesans to high-powered men. And so we follow multiple perspectives from that. We follow notes from the founder of the Pana, and the Pana is sanctuary in Persian. So these women, particularly the one we follow, are struggling with the historical impacts, really, of what the societal setup is. And so they've been through horrific things because of it. And really, I think that's kind of more the point of the book versus the actual dystopian elements. It's tackling what women being viewed as a tool, as an incubator, how negatively that impacts the treatment of women. And so I found those elements really impactful and important. One thing I did find interesting in this is that one of the characters actually expresses basically asexuality, and that was unexpected. Whom do I tell that I never feel anything beneath my waist, though? Apart from the usual aches and pains of menstruation, or the occasional morning when I wake up stinging or hurting, chafed by the cups we use for our flows, I don't really know what sexual desire feels like. That part of me is no more special or different than my arm or my nose. I almost feel sometimes as if I just want to erase it. Is that really my fault, though? The way they trained us in Green City to only think of sex as a means to repopulate a broken city, why would I long for physical contact? The idea of it fills me with misgiving. So I found that really interesting to read from a non-Western perspective, and this story was just really compelling, even with the kind of depictions of it. It does have rape, it has suicide, it has some like pedophilia, sexual assault. So it definitely has really heavy topics included in here, and the resistance of this feminist dystopia. We don't really get a ton of answers, but it talks about this from a very close internal perspective, and I found that fascinating. So then finally on my finishes, I'm not quite finished with this, but I'm on the second volume of My Brother's Husband by Gengoroh Tagame, and the first one we really saw the brother and his daughter kind of working through his homophobia specifically, and his initial impressions and biases. And in this one now, he is starting to think about what he would feel if his daughter grew up to love a woman. And so we're getting a lot more of that depthy conversation, and they spend a lot more time together getting over his preconceptions. So I've enjoyed this one. There's some weird things to it. I think the author maybe drew some more adult comics previously, and so there are these kind of random shower scenes. No explicit nudity or sex or anything, but it feels very out of place. So I've enjoyed it. It's very slice of life, and I really like that style. So that, I'm gonna finish that one up and return those to the library. Yay, really clearing off my library shelves. Then in progress, I still have The Dragon's Banker, going on my Kindle. I'm almost halfway and I'm really enjoying it. It's a very niche book. If you like mundane fantasy with a lot of financial elements, it's going to be that. The Shadow of the Wind, I made very little progress on this week, and I will be targeting to focus on this later today. My Ursula LeGuin project, I read 2 short stories, but they were the same story. Winter's King is set in the same world as Left Hand of Darkness, and it's about 30 pages, so it's kind of a novelette length. And there are 2 editions of that story. One was written in 1969 and the other was written in 1975. And the main difference is that the first one, it was written with he, him pronouns for the Gethans, who effectively don't have a gender. And then the second one was written with she, her pronouns. So it was really interesting to read through it from the different lens, as well like the relational terms, so son, mother, that sort of thing, are also kind of changed a little bit. So not big differences, but I did read through both of them, and I think I have one more short story left in this before I'm finished, and then I can move on to the next omnibus. And like I mentioned, I've got my Christmas reading project, so I've got these 3. I've read first chapters, and I'm going to start that project tomorrow. All of these are tiny. I really think I probably will be able to finish each of these in a day. So I don't think this is going to even take up all of my reading for the next week, but I gave myself from the 25th to the 31st to read these. Then we have new pickups. So one I actually picked up and read this morning is When We Went Wild by Isabella Tree and Allira T. Did the illustrations, and I love the art of this. Look at the end papers. Oh my gosh. So this is a children's book about rewilding. So we have farmers who were trying to do it the standard way and going broke on the chemicals and equipment, and didn't really know what else to do, and so they rewild their farm, and it's just gorgeous, beautiful, and I loved that at the end we have the author's note and pictures of their actual farm, which they did rewild. So I really enjoyed that. I've been enjoying looking at children's picture books at the library so much and just finding what I can. It's not an area of books that I'm super plugged into what is coming out, so I can really just look through and discover things. So, I mean, they're doing so many interesting things in children's picture books, and I love the setup at my library. I don't know if this is common or anything, but the children's picture books are not on shelves at my library. They're in bins that are kind of like front facing, and they have a leaned forward on a grade opening, so you can flip through them kind of like records, and so you can really just go through and flip through and look for whatever grabs your eye. So I've been enjoying discovering those a ton. So other than that, I picked up one additional thing, and that is Soul Lanterns by Shah Kuzuki, and this one is translated from Japanese. So the translator is Emily Balistrieri. And this is a YA book. I think it's lower end of YA, upper end of middle grade, but absolutely blows my mind. I have 400 some odd Goodreads friends, and not a single person has added this on their even TBR, much less reviewed it, which is pretty rare. But this is a historical novel about a girl in Hiroshima, and let me just read this. 12-year-old Nozomi lives in the Japanese city of Hiroshima. She wasn't even born when the bombing of Hiroshima took place, resulting in almost complete destruction of the city in a fireball as hot as the sun. Every year, Nozomi joins her family at the lantern floating ceremony to honor those lost in the bombing. People write the names of their deceased loved ones along with messages of peace on paper lanterns and set them afloat on the river. This year, Nozomi realizes that her mother always releases one lantern with no name. She begins to ask questions, and when complicated stories of loss and loneliness unfold, Nozomi and her friends come up with a creative way to share their loved ones' experiences. By opening people's eyes to the personal struggles they all keep hidden, the project teaches the entire community new ways to show compassion. So that sounds so good. I'm really excited for it. And this one might actually be a great pick for Women in Translation Month next month in August, because as far as I can tell, both the author and the translator use she, her pronouns. So I will be done with it by then, but hopefully when I'm done with it, I can recommend it to others for that purpose. So that is, I think, everything that I've got. I have a ton of other stuff that I want to get to. I've got my BookTube spin pick, number 1, and obviously this will all keep me super busy. On audio, I did also start Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Mbalia. So I'm really enjoying it. It's so imaginative. I'm really excited to continue on with that one. And then by pure coincidence, I took my foster cat to the vet this week, and it was a new vet, and a lot of the vets have been kind of reopening and moving away from curbside, so I was pretty sure I was going to be able to go in, and I was able to go in, but unfortunately, unexpectedly, they just left me in the waiting room, and I didn't get to go in for the actual exam. So I didn't have a book with me, so I just grabbed what was on my phone. So I started the latest Kindle First that I had gotten, which was Song of the Forever Rains by Mellow, and it has a gorgeous cover. So I got about 70 something pages into that and really was enjoying it. It really surprised me. It's got kind of a vocal magic, and there's like an underworld of thieves, so it was very fun, but it does start off with a little bit graphic stuff, some mutilation. So I'm liking it so far. It's not a big priority. I pretty much just picked it up because I didn't have anything else to read, and it is a very long one. So I will be slowly getting through that one. So I think that is it book-wise. I know it's, as always, a ton of stuff. That's why I do weekly, because it would be so overwhelming to do these things bi-weekly or monthly. Anyway, so otherwise, how was my week? The foster cat thing was a little frustrating. So I took him to the vet, like I said. They did not get back to me with blood work. It was kind of a weird situation where the new vet decided they're just going to talk to the shelter, and I'm gonna have to hear from the shelter. So they haven't gotten back to the shelter with the blood work. It's been a couple days, so I don't know what's going on with him. And it wasn't a problem that we were there for. We were there just to get a check on what his blood numbers are for his renal disease, and I'm expecting it not to be good news. And then I also got some new medication for his nose because he has really bad congestion. And so he now is getting nose drops twice a day. So he has just a litany of medical care that now I'm doing. So he's getting nasal drops twice a day now. That's new. He gets Zyrtec every day also for his congestion. He's getting fluids every other day, and he's getting medication on his ear. It's like a gel that helps his appetite every 3 days. So it's a lot at this point. And to not hear back on his blood work, I mean, I'm being hopeful and kind of thinking, no news is good news, maybe. Maybe he has not crossed over into the final stage. He was right on the line last time we checked his blood work about a month and a half ago. And so that's what I'm hoping for, but I'm anxious to hear back and hear what his blood work is and if we need to change anything, really. And then kind of more negative news, not to be totally negative. My area has gone back under a mask mandate because things are, I've talked about it before, we're back to having people airlifted to the hospital here from overloaded hospitals nearby because things are just going so poorly since they've really reopened. The last time I went to the store, I almost just left because nobody was wearing masks. It's crazy. Everything is just like, oh, it's back to normal. And I think our infection and death rates are up very considerably. So yeah, when I heard the news yesterday that they were returning to mask mandate, I got choked up, and just, it's so emotional to hear that after a year and a half almost. It just seems never ending, and people are so frustrating that, we are in a situation where everyone here absolutely had access by now to get a shot. They've had mass pushes to get it done. And yet, you know, the numbers in the announcement, they were talking about where we're at right now in the kind of greater county area, which is outside of the city where I live. We're barely over 40% shot rate. And then in the actual city center, they're in the mid 30s. And rural areas are even worse. And it's just so disappointing and heartbreaking, you know, looking at people in Canada or Japan or India that I know that are desperate to get shots or on huge wait lists to get them and can't, and people here have them available and have not. It just makes me so sad. So yeah, that was unexpectedly emotional and disappointing. But it doesn't change anything for me personally. I have continued to wear my mask, so I'm going to continue. And then otherwise, it was kind of a downer of a week, a really stressful work week, and we got our mid-year review stuff rolling this week, so I had to have conversations about that and getting all of my stuff written up and put in for that. So that always is really stressful. I tend to not be very good about talking up myself in terms of my work, so it's always really stressful for me. So yesterday I finished work and literally played Train Valley, which is like a train building game where the stations are kind of preset and then you build the tracks and like get ever increasing challenges to get trains from one to another station. But I played that for like 4 hours, and it's a perfect game to do an audiobook with because you don't need to listen to anything. But I didn't even remember to turn on an audiobook. I took like a cup of water down with me and I didn't even drink my water. I was so focused. So I just really immersed in that and played for hours and hours and didn't even realize it was like almost midnight. So yeah, so that was the good mental break I needed, I think. I think when I'm stressed out, I tend to get into those really focused kind of repetitive games. So I did that. What else has been going on this week? I've been watching Big Little Lies. That was one of the DVDs that I borrowed from the library when my internet was out, and I didn't get to it until this week, and I'm really enjoying it. Kind of sucked me in, but as typical with an HBO show, it's got some like gratuitous aggressive sex, and that I'm not really liking, but I do like the kind of thriller suspense elements. So I'm debating whether I want to pick up season 2 or not. I think I've got 2 more episodes of season 1, and we'll see how that goes. And if it kind of concludes, I may just stop there. But overall, really enjoying it. It definitely made me consider picking up the book, and which I hadn't before. So I think that is it for me this week. The only thing I have to point you to in terms of recommendations is that on Monday, there is going to be a panel with, I'm pretty sure I'm going to forget someone. I should have looked this up beforehand, but I will put everything down below as always. Charlie Jane Anders, P. Jelly Clark, and Fonda Lee. I think there's somebody else. And so I think it's geared more toward writers and people who want to be in publishing, but it should be a really interesting discussion. So I will link that. That's on Monday night, I believe the 26th. So should be a good one. And I think that's it. I hope everybody is staying safe and having a great reading week. Thanks so much for watching.